Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. There's a difference between a symbol and a copy. A symbol points to something absent, a copy imitates something present. But what happens when the copy no longer refers back to anything real, when it becomes its own system of meaning untethered from origin or referent? This is the central anxiety Jean Baudrillard explored in Simulacra and Simulation, a work often misunderstood as a warning about illusion when it is far more unsettling. It is an obituary for the real. Baudrillard doesn't argue that we are living in a computer-generated matrix. He argues something stranger, that we are surrounded by images, signs, and cultural artifacts that simulate reality, not by hiding it, but by rendering it obsolete. The simulation doesn't conceal the truth, it replaces the need for truth. A reality mediated by signs becomes a reality shaped by signs, and eventually a reality that only exists as signs. What once pointed to something real now points only to other representations. The map outgrows the territory. The photo replaces the memory. The performance becomes the self. In earlier times, simulations might have been distortions or idealizations, religious icons, propaganda, advertisements. But in postmodern, hyper-mediated culture, the simulation becomes total. News is consumed not for its facts, but for its shareability. Love is modelled on what feels cinematic. Protest is filtered through aesthetics. Even the most intimate experiences are documented as proof, curated into a version of self-optimized for platforms that never sleep. This isn't deception, it's structure. And structure, over time, becomes reality. Baudrillard called this final stage the hyperreal, a condition in which representations not only replace the real, but become more compelling than reality ever was. We no longer miss what we've lost. We only miss the simulation when it falters, and even that longing is designed. This essay does not aim to clarify Baudrillard. It attempts to dwell in what his writing made possible, a way of thinking from inside the simulation rather than outside it. It follows the drift of signs, the collapse of memory into image, the erosion of interior life into shareable moment. It speaks in a language shaped by the very structures it critiques, not to resolve that tension, but to inhabit it. What follows isn't an argument, it's a contour map of a world where presence has become performative, memory has become metadata, and truth has become a feeling the system learns to mimic better than we do. And still we scroll. You wake up and before your feet meet the ground, your thumb is already reaching, not for the alarm, not for the light, for the feed. The simulation begins not with a click, but with a gesture so familiar it no longer feels like choice. The phone isn't a tool. It's the syntax through which your day begins to make sense. Welcome back. Here's what you missed. But what did you miss? The stories vary. The format does not. A face in crisis. A protest framed by sunset. A new term for an old feeling. It's not deception. It's choreography. Even your outrage arrives pre-captioned. Even your empathy feels practiced. The emotions are real, but their arrival is not spontaneous. You're being written in real time by systems you taught how to read you. Still, you scroll, you say it's just catching up, just background noise, just input, but your body knows better. It flinches before certain headlines, it warms slightly at others. The simulation isn't just content, it's cadence, and cadence repeated becomes belief. You think of that video, the woman sobbing on the courthouse steps, no name, no context, just her grief, looped and shared. We feel this, the caption read. For days, she was everyone's proxy. By the time the real story surfaced, the image had moved on. The truth arrived late, and by then no one needed it. This is the drift, not from truth to lie, but from event to impression. The moment is flattened, accelerated, aestheticized, and you participate, not cynically, but fluently. You know the shapes your responses should take. You know how to signal resonance, to perform clarity, to move through the feed as if swimming in a current whose direction feels inevitable. You're not being manipulated, you're being mirrored. And what the mirror shows isn't false, just incomplete, just optimized, just enough real to feel anchored, just enough spectacle to keep you inside. The simulation doesn't need you to believe, it needs you to continue. Belief is optional. Participation is not. You pause, not because you've seen something meaningful, but because something in the scroll catches. An image, a word, a glitch. It doesn't reveal, it interrupts. Briefly, then the rhythm returns. Your thumb moves again, the cadence reasserts itself, the loop holds, and inside that loop, a question. If this isn't reality, why does it feel more coherent than the world outside it? Why does the simulation seem to know you better than you know yourself? The feed doesn't answer. It refreshes. You start to notice the objects, not the new ones, the ones that have always been there. The shoes still faintly white from a trip you almost didn't take. The mug chipped in the corner, chosen not for its utility, but because it resembled something from a film you never finished. The blanket arranged loosely over the back of the sofa, curated into a kind of softness. None of this is deception. It's composition. A life styled not for the camera, necessarily, but in its shadow. This is not performance in the theatrical sense. It's ritual. It's the slow, accumulated instinct of someone who has learned to pre-translate their surroundings into something legible. The room tells a story. You've heard it before, even if it wasn't yours. Elsewhere, someone is crying. Not quietly, not subtly, but with real intent. They record it, not to fake the feeling, but to shape it. They post the fifth take, the one where the lighting is even, the voice trembles in the right place. It isn't a lie. It's formatting, a translation of grief into something the system can register. This is where the real begins to blur, not because of illusion, but because of legibility. You aren't making things up. You're making them transmissible. The photos on your wall, the books you leave visible, the way your voice modulates slightly when you say, "I've been offline," each gesture carries signal. You want to be known. But you've also learned how to be interpreted. The simulation doesn't hide what matters. It teaches you what matters most is what can be rendered. And still, none of it feels dishonest. That's what makes it so effective. The warmth is real. The tears are real. The moment of pause before sending the message is real. But something else is happening beneath it, the slow erosion of reference points. You begin to forget what you liked before others saw it. You stop noticing when an opinion is yours and when it's been borrowed, softened, iterated. You share something that moves you. You add a caption that sharpens it. You look back later and find the caption has overwritten the memory. You say, "This meant a lot to me," but what you remember most is how well it performed. This isn't surveillance. It's fluency, and fluency over time reshapes desire. You don't want different things. You want the same things, but more coherently, more visibly. You want the proof of your feeling to be immediately understood. And when it is, when someone says, "I see you," you feel real again, or at least readable, which in this system may be the same thing. You begin to speak about the world as though it were a program you once helped write. The algorithm wants this. Everyone's curating. None of this is real. The sentences float at the edge of detachment, wry, observational, lightly exhausted. They sound like critique but function more like surrender. Naming the system becomes a way of shielding yourself from it. You talk about the simulation and in doing so participate. There's no hypocrisy in this, only recursion. To describe the shape of the feed is to reinforce its grammar. You point to its patterns. You notice its cycles. But awareness doesn't liberate you. It smooths your participation. You scroll ironically. You post with disclaimers. You say, "I hate this app" with one hand while the other selects the filter. It's not contradiction, it's coherence under new rules. And sometimes the simulation falters. A child speaks and you miss the sentence. You were refreshing. You were halfway through a video of someone reacting to someone else's story. You didn't mean to be distant. You were just elsewhere, inside a loop that didn't include her. When she asks what you thought of her drawing, you nod, hoping that's enough. Later, you wonder how much you missed, not in quantity, in texture. Elsewhere, a man records a voice note. He deletes it, records again. He isn't trying to fabricate a story. He's trying to make his pain sound the way pain sounds when it's taken seriously. There's no script for honesty anymore, only formats that approximate it. He isn't lying. He's learning how to be believed. These aren't exaggerations. They're routines, semiotic rehearsals. You start to notice how even small silences have lost their neutrality. A dinner without phones feels retro. An experience undocumented feels thin, like it never really took place. You remember an event from last year, but not the event itself. The caption, the layout, the likes, those have become the archive. Those are what endure. And the feeling this leaves behind isn't horror, it's administration. You scroll not out of compulsion, but to reattach, to re-enter the loop that organizes emotion into legibility. You reach for the feed not because you're lost, but because the alternative feels untranslatable. You aren't lonely, you're unrendered. And in that state, something subtle shifts. Presence becomes a maintenance task. You aren't recalling what you lived, you're recalling what you shared. You're maintaining a self whose coherence depends on continual external confirmation. But you're fluent in the architecture now. You can't unknow how to shape yourself for transmission. You don't want to escape, you want to be understood. And the simulation understands you better than anyone ever did. It has the data. It has the echo, it has the rhythm of your longing memorized. And so you scroll. At first, you think you're remembering a conversation, maybe a place, a feeling. But when you trace it back, you realize what you're recalling is the image, the post, the story version of the moment. It's not the dinner you remember, it's the overhead photo, perfectly lit. Not the walk itself, but the caption you wrote about walking. And once you notice this, it's hard to stop noticing. The memory doesn't degrade, it gets overwritten. Edited in retrospect by the performance that followed it. Experience becomes symbol, symbol becomes memory, memory becomes post, post becomes memory again. And somewhere in that recursion, the origin dissolves. You start to speak about things that happened to you, but what you're really describing is what those things look like in public. The awkwardness before the photo becomes part of the story. The absence of documentation becomes a kind of silence you feel compelled to apologize for. I didn't post about it, but, you say, as if absence from the feed requires justification. But what does that absence mean? A friend tells you she feels most real when she's narrating her life, not to others, but internally. In the syntax of posts, she doesn't journal. She drafts, she doesn't reflect, she rehearses. It's like, she says, if I can't imagine how I'd say it, then I don't know how I feel it. There's no irony in her voice, only fluency. This is what language becomes under simulation, not a tool for naming what is, but a framework for deciding what counts. You don't need to lie, you just need to describe, but describe in the correct tone, with the right rhythm, with references that align. You don't need to understand, you just need to match the format, and the format always wins, because the format is built on coherence. And coherence performs better than depth. It is easier to recognize than contradiction. It is faster to share than nuance. So you learn to speak in shapes that travel well. You speak with captions already baked into your thoughts. You pre-edit what you might feel later. And none of this is malicious. It's adaptive. The simulation doesn't punish you. It rewards legibility. The more compressible your pain, the more seen you are. The more optimally you express joy, the more it circulates. The more refined your grief, the more it resonates. The raw moment, the unshareable ache, feels like waste. It lingers without function, so you reshape it. You sculpt what's left into something communicable. And in doing so, you lose track of whether you're healing or formatting, whether the expression is for you or for the record, whether there's a difference anymore. And still, you scroll. Eventually, the cadence becomes a kind of background radiation. You don't notice the rhythm anymore, only when it's missing. A post with no caption feels incomplete. A photo without edits looks jarring. A thought left unshared lingers as like an open tab. You've internalized the simulation not as content, but as tempo, as a way of structuring experience into loops that complete themselves in public. There's a theory that saturation, not censorship, is the most effective form of erasure. Not because it hides the truth, but because it drowns it. The same image shown too many times loses its edge. The same kind of grief repeated starts to feel ornamental. Your reactions thin. Your attention fatigues. What once struck you now glances off. You remember caring deeply. You remember pausing at certain images, certain words. Now those same forms slide by, frictionless, not because you've grown numb. Because repetition dilutes weight. The simulation does not lie to you. It familiarizes you with feeling until the feeling stops landing. And so novelty replaces depth, not by design, but by necessity. There is only so much attention to give and too much need to be seen. You can't afford to linger. Lingering doesn't register. So you skim, repost, react. Small gestures of coherence. They tether you to the collective drift. But now and then something breaks. a glitch, a silence, a refusal, a photo that doesn't load, a message unsent, a sudden awkward pause in a stream. It doesn't look profound, it looks like a mistake. But in that disruption, something old stirs. Not clarity, not resistance, just time, undivided, unsold. You don't linger there long. The system is too well oiled. The scroll catches your eye again. A notification pings. A new crisis begins to trend. The loop resumes, but the interruption leaves a trace. Not insight, not change. Just a dent in the coherence. A moment where you almost stepped out. You don't mention it. There's nothing to say. It wasn't shareable. It didn't format. It can't be posted without altering what it was. So you keep it quietly, like a hidden version of yourself that didn't perform. It doesn't last, but it doesn't vanish either. It's there in the way you now hesitate before posting, in the way you question whether the emotion is yours or just well articulated, in the way you notice how quickly awe becomes aesthetic, how quickly sincerity becomes content, how quickly longing becomes loop. And in that noticing, something real flickers. Not freedom, but the echo of what freedom might have felt like before it was optimized. You revisit a memory, or think you do, but the sensation doesn't arrive intact. What surfaces first is the image, the one you posted, the color grading, the caption, the moment curated into coherence, and you realize that's what you remember, not the thing itself, the representation, the version optimized for others. What had texture now has form, what had silence now has frame. This isn't decay, it's compression. The simulation doesn't erase the real, it resizes it. Fits it into the structures that move fastest, spread widest. You feel the moment shrinking as you recall it, not in emotion, but in shape. It has become manageable, transferable. You no longer grieve the loss of detail. You accept the outline. You repost it when the On This Day app reminds you. The memory re-enters circulation. You like your own post. Elsewhere, a woman stares at a photo from 5 years ago. Her smile looks real. She doesn't remember how she felt. She remembers that others thought it looked like joy. She remembers the comments, the number of shares. And that becomes enough. That becomes the memory. The simulation doesn't need to manipulate you. It just offers continuity. The loop that makes sense of everything you've shared by feeding it back to you. It curates nostalgia, not to trick you, but to stabilize you. You crave the loop, not because it lies, because it organizes. And in moments of disorganization, when the scroll freezes, when the feed won't refresh, you feel it. A silence you don't know how to hold. A pause you can't name. Not boredom, not fear. Something stranger, the absence of formatting, an experience without interface. You look around, the room is still, the phone is down, you're not documenting anything, no one's watching, there's nothing to interpret, nothing to post. You feel real, but unregistered. You feel alive, but unverifiable. And it leaves you with a question. If something happens and no one sees it, no one shares it, no one translates it, does it still matter? The question isn't philosophical. It's practical, because so much of what once felt meaningful is now legible only when mediated. You don't feel lonely. You feel untranslated. You feel like raw data without an interface. And the system waits, not maliciously, patiently. It knows silence can't hold. It knows you'll return. That coherence feels safer than confusion, that even abstraction can be made palatable if it's captioned just right. So you reach again, not for the truth, for the rhythm, and the rhythm delivers. You try to stop, not in protest, not in anger, just to see what remains when the cadence breaks. You leave the phone untouched. You don't open the tab. You let the quiet stretch beyond its usual limits. The first thing you notice isn't peace. It's absence, not the absence of noise, but of orientation. Without the simulation, time loses its architecture. Emotion loses its coordinates. You feel something, maybe boredom, maybe grief, but it doesn't arrive in a shape you know how to share, and that makes it feel less real. Baudrillard called this final stage the hyperreal, a condition in which representations not only replace the real, but become more compelling than reality ever was. We no longer miss what we've lost. You glance around. The room hasn't changed, but it looks unfamiliar, less curated, less meaningful. You realize how much of your environment was designed to be photographed, how much of your expression was rehearsed for translation. The colors, the books, the coffee mug, without the simulation, they lose their edge, not their function. but their aura. You no longer know what they're saying about you, and that uncertainty unsettles you. You hold it a little longer, the discomfort, the unframed moment. Nothing happens, and yet something shifts. You start to wonder what part of you hasn't been written yet, what part doesn't match a template. You don't find an answer, but you sense the outline of something beyond rhythm, beyond scroll, beyond coherence. Then the thought occurs you could leave, not symbolically, actually walk away. Change the structure, disengage, not forever, but long enough to remember what longing felt like before it was mirrored back. But the moment doesn't last. A notification pings, a memory resurfaces, a habit takes over, and just like that, the rhythm returns. It's not an act of surrender, it's alignment. You re-enter not because you're weak, but because the system is designed to be more familiar than solitude. Still, you carry something back, a trace of unscripted presence. A breath that didn't loop, a pause that didn't post. It isn't clarity, it isn't resistance, but it's a wrinkle in the simulation, a pocket of lag in the endless refresh. You scroll again, but not quite the same. There's a flicker, a delay, a moment where the image doesn't fully hold, and in that moment, something illegible remains.